Hello everyone there. We will be talking about project risk management controls in. So, what is the agenda? We'll have a brief introduction about it. We'll try to identify a risk, the projections thereabout, and the mitigation strategies. We will be talking about RMMM, risk mitigation, risk monitoring, and risk management. So, risk mitigation, monitoring, and management strategies thereby. So, what is a project risk? What can possibly go wrong? What is the likelihood, the frequency, if it is going to be repeated, what kind of damage, or should I say the consequences, how grave the consequences can be, and what can we do about it, the remedial measure. Let us try to categorize risk. Let me give you the first approach. The project risk, they threaten the project plan. The very project plan has been threatened by it. If they become real, it is likelihood that the project schedule will slip. You will miss the deadline, and the cost will escalate over a period of time. So this is a genuine project risk that comes around it. Then comes the technical risk. They threaten the quality and the timeliness of the software that needs to be produced, or the project that needs to be produced, the product that needs to be produced, the services that needs to be delivered. If they become real, implementation may become difficult or impossible. The business risk, they threaten the viability of the software or the project or the product to be built. If they become real, they will jeopardize the project or the product, as the case might. So, risk categorization approach one. Subcategories of business risk. We are talking about the market risk, building an excellent product or system that no one really has or wants. Strategic risk, building a product that no longer fits into the overall business strategy for the company. Sales risk, building a product that the sales force doesn't understand how to sell. Management risk, losing the support of the senior management due to the change in focus or a change in people. Budget risk, losing budgetary or personal commitment per se. Let me give the categorization with a different approach altogether. The second approach, vis-a-vis the known risk, the risk that can be uncovered after careful evaluation of the project plan, the business, the technical environment in which project is being developed, and the other reliable information sources, example, unrealistic delivery dates. Predictable risk, those risks that are extrapolated from the past project experiences, example, past turnover. And the unpredictable risk, those risks that can and do occur but are extremely difficult to identify in advance per se. The risk management. The risk management is carried out to identify the risk, reduce the impact of the risk, reduce the probability or even the likelihood of the risk, and the risk monitoring capacity. So, what are we looking into? Once we identify the risks, which will rather help us, enable us to reduce the impact of the risk, thereby in fact, if we can reduce the impact, can we reduce the probability of or likelihood of the risk at the first place? And this is all about risk monitoring that goes around here. So, reactive versus proactive risk strategy. Reactive risk strategy. Don't worry, I'll think of something. As in, you are waiting for the events to occur and then probably you'll start giving your actions or reactions thereof. The majority of software teams and managers rely on this approach. Nothing is done about risk until something goes wrong. The team then flies into action in an attempt to correct the problem rapidly, as in the firefighting scenario. Crisis management is a choice of management risk. Proactive risk strategy. Steps for risk management are followed. Primary objective is to avoid risk and to have a contingency plan in place to handle unavoidable risk in the controlled and effective fashion. The reactive risk, what do we look into it? Don't worry. The steps of the risk management. Now, there are four steps to it. First is to identify the possible risks, recognize what possibly can go wrong. Then, probably analyze each risk, estimate the probability of it to occur, and if it occurs, what kind of impact will it leave, the damages that it will occur. Then the third step is to rank the risk by probability and also by the impact may be negligible, marginal, critical, or catastrophic in nature. The last step, the fourth step, is developing a contingency plan to manage those risks having a high probability and a high impact thereby. Let us go to the steps of the risk one at a time. Identify the possible risk, as in what can go wrong. This will lead to the analyzing each of the risk, estimating the probability of it happening and the consequences of the impact that it will leave behind. Rank those risks by probability and also by impact. Impact may be anything: negligible, marginal, critical, catastrophic, and develop a remedial plan, the contingency plan to manage those risks or have a high probability and a high impact. Let us now keep our focus to risk identification background. Risk identification is a systematic attempt to specify threats to the project plan. By identifying known and predictable risks, the project manager takes a first step towards avoiding them when possible and controlling them when necessary. Generic risks that are potential threats to every software project. Product specific risks that can be identified only by those with a clear understanding of technology, the people, and the environment that is specific to the software that is to be built. This requires examination of the project plan and the statement of the scope. What special characteristics of this product may threaten our project plan altogether? We'll talk about the risk item checklist, used as one way to identify the risk thereof. Focuses on known and predictable risks in the specific subcategories. It can be organized in several ways, more than one way if I may say so. A list of characteristics relevant for each of the subcategory. Questionnaire that can lead to an estimate on the impact of each risk. A list of containing a set of risk component and drivers of their probable chances of occurrence per se. Let us come to the known and predictable risk categories. See, first is your product size, risk associated with the overall size of the product, the software, the project that needs to be built. Second is the business impact, risk associated with constraint imposed by the management or even by the marketplace. Let's say the sensitivity, price sensitivity of the consumers. Customer characteristic, risks associated with sophistication of the customer, and the developer's ability to communicate with the customers in a timely fashion. Fourth one is process definition, risk associated with the degree in which software processes has been defined and probably is followed. Development environment, the risk associated with the availability and the quality of the tools to be used to be built the project. Technology to be built, risk associated with the complexity of the system to be built and the newness of the technology in the system, the uniqueness, if I may say so. The staff size, the seventh one, staff size and experience, risk associated with overall technical and the project experience of your engineers, of your manpowers who will be engaged in the work. So recording the risk information project, let me give it to you. It can be a software project of XYZ system. The risk type is all about schedule risk. Priority can be 1, which is low, or can be prior marked till 5 on a 5-point scale, which is critical. Let us mark it at 4. Risk factor, project completion will depend on the test, which requires hardware components under development. Hardware component delivery may be delayed. Probability chances of getting it delayed is 60%. Impact, project completion will be delayed for each day that hardware is unavailable. For the use of software testing, monitoring approach, schedule milestone reviews with hardware groups, contingency plan, modification of the testing strategy to accommodate the delay. Using software simulation, estimated resources are 6 additional persons. So, the risk component and driver. The project manager identifies the risk drivers that affect the following risk component. Performance risk, the degree of uncertainty that the product will meet its requirement and be fit for the intended use. The cost risk, the degree of uncertainty that the project budget will be maintained. Support risk, the degree of uncertainty that the resultant software will be easy to correct, adapt, and enhance. Schedule risk, the degree of uncertainty that the project schedule will be maintained and that the product will be delivered on time. The impact of each risk drivers on the risk component is divided one of 4 impact level: negligible, marginal, critical, and catastrophic. The risk drivers can be assessed as impossible, improbable, probable, and frequent. Now, let me give you an estimation about the projections that the risk can be having it. Risk projection or estimation attempts to rate risk either of the two ways. The probability of the risk is real, or the consequences of the problem associated with the risk should it occur. What kind of consequences? The project planner, managers, and the technical staff perform four risk projection steps. The intent of this step is to consider the risk in the manner that lead to the prioritization. By prioritization risk, the software team can allocate limited resources where they will be having the most of the impact. Risk projection estimation steps per se, establishing likelihood of the fact that it reflects on a perceived risk, let's say 1 being low and 10 being high. So it's a 10-point scale, 1 being low and the 10 being high. In between might be neutral. Delineate the consequences of the risk. Yes, definitely yes. If you are having a low risk, what are the consequences? If you are having high risk, what are the consequences? Estimate the impact of the risk on the project and obviously the product. Note that overall accuracy of the risk projection so that there will be no misconception, no misunderstanding. Everything has been stated in black and white so everybody can understand what is what. A risk table, a project manager with a simple technique for risk projection. It consists of 5 columns: the risk summary, short description of the risk category, one of the 7 risk categories, probability estimation of the risk occurrence based on the group inputs. Impact can be 4: catastrophic, critical, marginal, and negligible. The RMMM, the risk management, monitoring, and mitigation technique. The pointers to the risk mitigation, monitoring, and management plan is all about it. And here is what we can be going around it. And this will give me the contents for the risk table thereof. Now, how do I develop those risk table? List all the risks in the first column by way of the help of the risk item checklist if there are possible. If it is not there, ask your team members to jot down the risk that they can possibly think of and then probably discuss it out before choosing them all together. Mark those categories of each risk, estimate the probability of each risk occurring. Assess the impact of each risk based on the average of the 4 risk component and the component that determines an overall impact altogether. Sort the rows by probability. Impact in descending order. Draw a horizontal cutoff line in the table that indicates the risk will be given further attention. Now let us move to assessing the risk impact. There are 3 factors affect the consequences that are likely to occur if risk happens. Its nature, this indicates the problem that are likely if the risk occurs. Its scope, this combines the severity of the risk, how serious was it, with its own overall distribution, how much was affected. Its time, this considers when and for how long the impact will be felt. The overall risk exposures formula is risk exposures is all about P times C. The probability of the risk happening and the consequences of the risk if it happens at all. The P is the probability of the occurrence of the risk. C is the cost or the consequences of the project that the risk actually occurs. Example, there is a probability of 80% probability that 18 of the 60 software control will have to be redeveloped from scratch. See, the total cost of developing those 18 components will be approximately $25,000. So here is a risk exposure, 80 percentile times $25,000 is all about $20,000 that we are risking it all about. RMMM, risk mitigation, monitoring, and management. So, background and effective strategy for dealing with the risk must consider 3 issues. Note, these are not very much mutually exclusive. Risk mitigation is also about avoidances. Risk monitoring is also about observing. Risk management is also about implementing and the contingency planning. So, risk mitigation, avoidance is the primary stage and is achieved through a plan. Example, risk of a high staff turnover. So, strategy for reducing staff turnover. How do we do it? We meet with the current staff to determine the causes of why are they leaving. As if poor working conditions or low pay or competitive job market, then mitigate those causes that are under our control before the project start. Once the project commences, assume turnover will occur and develop techniques to ensure the continuity when the people leave. Organize project teams so that the information about each development activities is widely dispersed. Define documentation standards and establish mechanism to ensure that the documents are developed in a timely manner. Conduct peer reviews of all work so that more than one person is up to the speed, and assign a backup staff in case if there somebody fails to appear for every critical technologist. During risk monitoring, the project manager monitors the factors that may provide an indication of whether a risk is becoming more or less likely. Risk management and the contingency planning assume that the mitigation efforts have failed, that the risk has become a reality. The risk mitigation monitoring and management steps incur additional project costs. Large projects may have identified more than 30 to 40 risks. Risk, remember, is not limited to the project itself. This can occur after the project has been delivered to the users. Let's say the software safety and hazard analysis. These are project quality assurances that goes around it. Activities that focuses on identification and assessment of the potential hazards that may affect software negatively and cause an entire system to fail. If hazards can be identified early, the software processes, software design features can be specified and will either eliminate or control potential hazard. The risk mitigation monitoring and management plan may be a part of a development plan altogether, or a software development plan, or maybe a separate document altogether. Only RMM has been documented, the project should begin. The risk mitigation and monitoring steps begins with risk mitigation is a problem avoidance activity. Risk monitoring is a project tracking activity. So risk monitoring has three objectives: to assess whether the predicted risks do in fact occur, to ensure that the risk aversion steps defined for the risk are being properly applied, to collect information that can be used for future risk. The finding from risk monitoring may allow the project managers to ascertain what risk causes the problem throughout the project. I would like to wind it up by stating the seven principles of risk management. First is to maintain a global perspective, view software risk within the context of the system, the business problem, and that is intended to solve. View every project problem. Take a forward-looking view. Think about the risks that may arise in future. Establish contingency plan. Always, the third one is to encourage open communication. Encourage all stakeholders and users to point out risk at any point of time. Integrate risk management. Integrate the consideration of risk into the project process, the software process. Emphasize a continuous process of risk management. Modify identified risk as more become known, and identify risk as better insight is achieved. Develop a shared product vision. A shared vision by all stakeholders facilitate better risk identification and assessment. The last one is encouraging the teamwork when managing the risk. Pool the skills, pool the experience of all stakeholders when conducting the risk management activities. With this, I sign off from this video. Thank you for watching the video till the end.